Okay, folks, here's the deal. We're about an hour behind on a one-day meeting. So I'm going to implore my fellow commissioners, if you really have nothing important to say, let's just not say it.
Ouch.
And for the audience, if you support something, just say I support it. If you don't support it, then we would obviously love to hear your reasons why not. But I am determined today to get through this whole agenda. So we will open with item 21, which is a public hearing. And Garth.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Alvarado. I'll be very, very brief on my my speaking points here. Just really, tab 21, commissioners, is an informational item, and California Government Code states that the Commission has authority to develop guidelines for the preparation of the regional transportation plans. Commission staff, Caltrans, and a wide range of stakeholders have spent a considerable amount of time over the past 6 months to update the RTP guidelines. The final draft of the RTP guidelines is being brought before you today, and also to serve as the statutory requirement for the Southern California workshop. The January CTC meeting will serve as the Northern California statutorily required workshop for the update of the RTP guidelines. Just some real quick background. RTPs and the RTP guidelines are nothing new. They've been around for over 40 years. Also, for the past several years, RTPs have grown exceedingly complex and moved to incorporate issues that traditionally were not included in transportation plans, and accordingly, the RTP guidelines have been updated as needed to address new issues and new requirements. And I just, a couple of bullet points here real quick. The first RTP guidelines was adopted by the Commission back in 1978 and had a total of 73 pages. The current RTP guidelines, which was adopted by the Commission in 2010, had 245 pages, and that's primarily to address the vast new SB 375 requirements. This latest RTP, the draft RTP guidelines, is about 245 pages long, or is about 340 pages long, which is about 100 pages more. And the reason that I mention this is to illustrate that the additional requirements and issues that RTPs are addressing. And this is important to ensure that we understand the content of the RTPs is growing to address a wider range of issues, as I mentioned. And I state this not as a negative comment, but it's just a recognition that RTPs are becoming more and more complex. Just real quick on the purpose of the RTP guidelines. Basically, the RTP guidelines are intended to identify the federal and state requirements for the development of RTPs. And the guidelines use the terms should and shall. And the shall items are ones that are required to be addressed in the RTP, and the should are not required, but are suggested to be included in respective RTPs. The guidelines promote an integrated statewide regional transportation planning process and assures a planning process is established to consider all stakeholders. Major changes to the guidelines. Commission staff and Caltrans undertook the update of the RTP guidelines at this time to ensure that the statutory state requirements in AB 441, which required that information on public health be included in the RTP guidelines, which was addressed in one of the appendices, and any new federal requirements in MAP 21 or the FAST Act were included as well. Commission staff waited to elect to address, specifically items related to SB 743, which is, moving away moving to a VMT-based metric, and also the federal requirements for performance measures until both of those items have becoming a little more finalized and can be determined, what are the impact of the RTP process. There's a number of sweeping changes to the RTP guidelines, most predominantly, like I mentioned, the addition of Appendix K, which is the statutory requirement to address public health in the guidelines. Also, on page 17 of the guidelines, I won't go through the whole host of changes that were included in the 2016 RTP guidelines, but that's on page 17 of the RTP guidelines if you're so inclined to look at those. Outreach efforts, really just wanted to emphasize to the commissioners that there has been extensive outreach over the past 6 months. Last June, CTC staff mailed out over 2,000, sent an email to over 2,000 organizations statewide informing them of this effort to update the RTP guidelines. And from that, we were about 150 organizations said that they'd like to either participate in work groups or be informed of the process. And our outreach effort began on June 30th in Sacramento, where we held a large kickoff meeting for the update of the RTP guidelines and also on the development of the first ever CTP, or California Transportation Plan guidelines. There are two major drafts of the RTP guidelines, and it's something that's important that the Commission should be aware of, that this will be the first time that we have one specific RTP guidelines for MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, and one for RTPAs. And that's just to acknowledge the fact that MPOs are significantly more planning requirements for them in the development of their RTPs. Over the past 6 months, Commission staff has organized a total of 11 work group meetings around the state in Sacramento, Los Angeles, and in Fresno. And the primary purpose of these work group meetings was to talk through specific sections of the RTP guidelines in more detail and obtain input from the attendees. These work groups were all accessible via telephone and the webinar. In addition to the 11 work group meetings, we held over 30 smaller meetings with specific stakeholders to talk about various issues relating to modeling, how the guidelines should address active transportation, environmental justice issues. In terms of next steps, both the Commission and Caltrans staff will be working on editing the final, editing and formatting the final RTP guidelines. And also, we're wrapping up some specific language relating to Title VI and environmental justice, and that will be concluded by the end of next week. Any language changes are going to be fairly minor from my understanding, and we'll make sure that all parties that have been engaged in the process are aware of those changes. In January, Commission staff intends to bring the RTP guidelines before the Commission for adoption. Before I conclude, I just really want to acknowledge and thank all the individuals that were involved from a wide range of governmental and advocacy groups who participate in the process, as well as state agencies. And I also specifically want to thank Priscilla Martinez-Velez from Caltrans, who did a vast majority of the work in actually putting the guidelines together from getting them all typed up. Also Kelly Egan from Caltrans, who worked on the modeling section, then also Reza Navai and Aaron Thompson from Caltrans. And lastly but not least, our own Laura Pennybaker from the Commission staff, who was instrumental in organizing the meetings and putting the extensive effort together. They all did a fantastic job, and I just really appreciate that. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I don't know if there's any questions on this at this time.
Good afternoon again. I'm Bill Sadler with Safe Routes to School National Partnership. In addition to the Active Transportation Program, one of the biggest things that my organization works on in California is regional transportation plans, and working with MPOs specifically in the Bay Area and the Southern California region on the active transportation component. So I've been an active participant in this process as well, and I wanted to thank the staff. Just like with ATP, you have great staff at the CTC that leads these processes, but particularly for allowing us the opportunity to participate very actively. I've been coordinating over 24 organizations that work on not only transportation, but public health and housing, climate, environmental issues, social equity, et cetera, that are part of the RTP guidelines. So I just wanted to just kind of strongly support some of the following things that Garth mentioned. Public health, as you know, there's a public health appendix for the first time, and we've been an active participant in helping with that language and making sure that that's elevated in the guidelines. Additional language on active transportation and complete streets and some of the other issues that are part of the ATP, but bringing those into the RTP guidelines. The civil rights and social equity factors that Garth mentioned, a new chapter on performance measures, which is increasingly becoming a larger issue at the state and the federal level as well. And also an appendix on planning practice examples, kind of lifting up what MPOs are doing into an appendix so that other MPOs, as they develop their RTPs, can see other examples of some of the things that MPOs are doing, because there's a lot of great work happening around the state. I did just want to highlight, though, that we have been kind of concerned about the process itself. It's wrapping up now, but it's been 6 months, and it's been a rushed process. And a lot of us in the advocacy world have had a hard time keeping up with the process. And I myself and a few others have been able to devote a lot of time, but there's not a lot of these processes are happen fast, or there's just a lot of meetings. And then just consensus building. I would say that throughout the process, and the work groups in particular, we've been happy to develop some good relationships with staff at other MPOs, but there has been points where it has been tough on consensus, which is a natural part of the consensus building process for everyone to agree on changes. And then just the moving items to the appendix. I think a lot of the things that we were happy to see ended up in the appendix instead of in the guidelines themselves. And obviously there's the shalls versus shoulds issue, but there is just kind of concern that these will not be regarded in the overall document if they're in an appendix. And then just finally, there's not a lot of mention of issues like housing or other issues that are not directly related to RTPs, but are linked, essentially linked, and are affecting our region. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to working with you throughout the process as it continues and wraps up.
Thank you. Stella.
Hi, Stella Kim with the California Pan-Ethnic Health Network again. Oh, a little shorter than him. So CPAN, our organization, was one of the sponsor organizations of AB 441 Monning, which was the authorizing legislation that required the inclusion of the Public Health Index. So we're really pleased to see the evolution of that section from the initial draft, and appreciate that the Public Health Work Group recommendations, for the most part, made its way into the final draft. And we do want to acknowledge the work that Laura Pennebaker did. And despite the condensed timeline, that staff was really flexible and receptive. One point we do want to make sure that we reiterate as well is around the timeline, that moving forward, we would really request more time to work through these issues and reach out to community members themselves who are affected by these issues the next time that the guidelines are revised. We really want to ensure that there's sufficient time and resources to engage communities where they're at, and particularly around the transportation, integration of health, climate change, and environmental justice. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and we really look forward to continuing to engage in collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles.
Most people don't know that name. I'm Mug Stoll, the planning director for the San Diego Association of Governments, or SANDAG. Based on your direction, I'll keep it very, very short. I want to thank the commission staff, the Caltrans staff, for the process they've conducted. We appreciate, you've heard something about some comments about timing. It's important to us that we move the process forward because we are the first, once again, to do our third RTP under SB 375 and under new targets and so forth. We just put out our NOP for our EIR for our next plan, which is due in 2019. It takes a long time to do these, and so we appreciate the fact that this process was moved along. Our issue all along was that guidelines remain just that, guidelines, and they have through the process that we've gone through. And we participated in all of the workshops and all of the subgroup meetings, and we very much appreciate it. So it was a difficult and complex job that your staff took on, and they've done a great job. And so we support them. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Higgins.
Good afternoon, Bill Higgins with the California Association of Councils of Governments, which is 45 regional agencies, small, medium, big, and the really big one behind me, who I think is going to talk. I want to, first of all, just thank your staff for doing an excellent job. Garth named, all of them, but Garth actually did a very good job as well. There were 30 meetings. We attended all of them, and there was a lot of discussion. One thing that, and I'll condense it to be really short. I have a lot of really great talking points here, but there are some places in the guidelines for our members to talk with your members to develop, particularly on modeling, as a forum to make sure that we stay up to date. The one challenge I'll give for this group is there's 100 more pages. We agreed to those 100 more pages, but there's a lot more performance responsibility in that, and there's no new funding. And when one opportunity that this group has is in your annual report, is to call that out. If we're going to be doing more about performance and data maintenance in order to record this and how all transportation integrates this, then we need to take a look at the funding source, because we covered a lot with SB 375, but that well's kind of run dry in terms of our resources of funding. We used to have blueprint funding that used to fund different things. There are some, maybe we need to sit down and take a look at that, because if you want the regions to be doing this, then we also need to make sure that we have the resources to do it well. So a challenge for us going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. He wasn't supposed to say large, he was supposed to be favorite member. So he's not getting his dues, which are due. So thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to echo what Bill said to Susan, Garth, and all of your staff. You've done a great job. All the guideline needs now is money from Mr. Frazier. So we get more busy giving money out. I do want to mention that those guidelines are important to be coordinated really well with what's happened in 743, because the impact of this could be significant, and I know you're going to have a discussion about that later. But again, Susan, Garth, thank you for your work. You have a great job and a great challenge behind you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay, we're closed. Okay, we're going to jump to item 24, and then we're going to come back to item 22. Rick?
Yes. Commissioners, item 24 is an information item and presentation by the department on the 2017 State Highway System Management Plan. This plan is a new integrated management plan that encompasses the requirements in the Streets and Highways Code for both the 10-year shop plan and 5-year maintenance plan. Mr. Mike Johnson, the department's asset manager, will be delivering this presentation and information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I'll try to make this as brief as possible. As part of the department's ongoing implementation of asset management, we are pleased to be here to present to you a preview of the 2017 State Highway System Management Plan. This plan will be presented to the Commission under California law next month. So just a quick refresher, under California Streets and Highway Code, the department is tasked with preparing a 10-year plan for the State Highway Operation and Protection Program, SHOP. We are also tasked with preparing a 5-year maintenance plan for the state highway systems. The Streets and Highway Code further requires that these plans be coordinated and that resources be balanced between the two plans. The combination of those two plans are presented in odd number years to the Commission or to the legislature, and they will form the basis for the future fund estimate that Stephen talked about a little earlier. The new wrinkle in all of this is that with the changes to the California Government Code under Senate Bill 486, the Commission now has the authority for asset management related decisions and specifically target setting with respect to asset management. To make things even a little bit more complicated, we have Vince and Monica back here in the federal government that has imposed a number of federal requirements related to asset management. We have to produce a plan, and the state law says that our state asset management plan will be consistent with federal law. So we need to try to balance all of these things, and it's quite a bit. So we've got the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, balance, maintenance, and rehab. We want to try to align this whole plan with our strategic goals as a department. Under federal regulation, we have to implement performance management as part of the asset management plan. We have to introduce or incorporate the performance targets for bridges and pavement that the Commission approved back in October. And we have to have a robust asset management plan. And so to do all of this, I say it's really like threading a needle, because this is quite a landscape of regulations to navigate through. And we're going to try to do this through a new report called the State Highway System Management Plan. So what is this plan? First of all, it's an integrated management plan that encompasses the Streets and Highway Code and government code requirements and satisfies those requirements of MAP 21 FAST Act. At the same time, it will realign our financial investments to be consistent with the Caltrans Strategic Management Plan and the targets that were adopted by the Commission for the 4 asset classes: pavements, bridges, culverts, and traffic management systems. The plan in general includes 2 major components: a needs assessment for the state highway system and an investment plan. The needs assessment is going to be, or has been conducted using the performance management approach required under federal regulation. So this is a new approach for the needs assessment. That assessment is asset-centric, and it's independent of funding sources that actually contribute to the condition of those assets. California will be one of the first in the nation to fully implement performance management. Although this is a national requirement, and many states are working towards this for pavements and bridges, in California, we're trying to do it for everything. In addition, the investment plans that we will put forward will be integrated. So we will show the investment plan from maintenance, from the shop, and also from the FAST Act funds that are made available for freight. Our hope is that through all of this, there will be a clearer picture of the condition of the highway system and the various investments that are coming from different sources and how they work together to contribute to the overall condition and performance of the system. Somewhat quiet, but almost as important, is that along with this approach is a completely new performance management-based distribution of funds that will effectively break down the asset-centric funding silos that have existed for a number of years. So I'm going to talk today just about the needs assessment, just to keep things brief. As I mentioned, we performed a performance management analysis for all the major objectives that are carried out within the shop and maintenance. The Cliff Note version of all of this is that the major assets, pavement, bridges, culverts, not much change or net change. However, there were changes in other areas. The effect of all of that is that the total statewide need has gone up to $97 billion from our prior plan, which was $80 billion. So this $17 billion increase is generally, a lot of it is attributed to cost escalation, as you can see in this slide. There's an increase of about $12 billion. That is attributed in part to the cost escalation included in the fund estimate. It was a little bit more than 1.5% higher than the prior plan, and the escalation period is to the midpoint of the need for this plan, which is the 7.5-year point of the 10-year plan. In prior plans, it was to the 5-year period. In addition, this plan will fully account for the ADA needs that were identified in the transition plan. That results in an increase of $2.8 billion in the statewide need. The prior plan only had the settlement amount and not the actual statewide state highway system need. And then, as part of our asset management implementation, we've been doing a lot of work with respect to our facilities. We believe that our facilities have been prioritized out of funding for some time within the shop, and there's a limit to how long you can continue to do that before we start having problems that will demand attention. As a result of that, the assessment of our transportation-related facilities, maintenance stations, TMCs, our roadside rests, our office buildings, there's an increase identified of about $1.7 billion. So looking forward to next steps, we will be providing an update to the Commission again in January. That will give a little bit more information, an overview of where we put the money that we have, because when we look at the fund estimate relative to the state highway system needs coming out of the needs assessment, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 cents on the dollar for the needs. The draft plan will be submitted on January 31st to the Commission and the Legislature, and our final plan, after receiving comments, will be published in May of 2017. So that will conclude my presentation, and be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to item 22.
Sure, Commissioners, tab 22 is an action item. The Commission has received inquiries on the Caltrans Interim Local Development Intergovernmental Review, or LDIGR, guidance they recently prepared. As a result, we've requested Caltrans staff to provide the Commission with background on their internal guidance document. And Kome Ajise from Caltrans is here to provide that overview. Kome?
Good afternoon, Chair Alvarado, Commissioners. My name is Kome Ajise. I'm the Chief Deputy Director at Caltrans, here to speak on the LDIGR guidelines at Caltrans. Just for background, I think we probably overreached by calling them guidelines in the first place, because I think it's confusing things where folks are comparing to the OPR guidelines. These are essentially this is essentially a handbook for our staff as a desk reference for the work they do in reviewing local development as they come to the districts. The intent of the guidelines, the LDIGR guidelines, was really to provide some direction to staff on how we were looking to pivot from our traditional review of projects using the LOS basis to a more VMT-based analysis. And we didn't want to have a situation where each district was doing it their own different ways. And just saying that, I think, sort of recalls how we got to having guidelines in the first place. I think our first set of guidelines for LDIGR review were prepared in the early 90s when we were having the same issue where each district was reviewing local development in different ways, and there were complaints from mostly the building industries and the local jurisdictions. And so we put together a set of guidelines just loosely at the time. And then by 2002, we actually had a more formal set of guidelines that were put in place so that we had a consistent review of local development across the state, where all districts were using the same set of guidelines. Those 2002 guidelines is what we've used up till this point. And the reason we felt compelled to voluntarily step forward to change the guidelines is because of SB 743 requiring that we look away from using level of service as a measure of significance under CEQA. And to do that, we felt like we needed to provide staff with some directive. And so we actually stepped out and decided to do a more holistic look at what we call the Traffic Analysis Guide and Traffic Impact Study Guide, tagged TISG, such that we went out and got a consultant to do a wholesale review with a steering committee and a technical committee that has representation across all of our stakeholders, cities and counties, and regional agencies, as well as academia. So we're actually looking more broadly. That work is ongoing as we speak. But in the meantime, we felt like since the law has actually changed, staff needed something to be using for their work. And that's where this interim guidelines came from. I just want to stop there and see if there are any questions, because I think this is really more of trying to address the issues that may have come to you than me talking about the guidelines themselves.
I'm sure there are going to be plenty of questions. We have a couple of speakers. You want to hear the speakers first and then take questions? Okay, would people approach the microphone, please? Richard Lyon, Andrew Henderson, it's kind of scratched up here, and Wes May. Welcome, Mr. Lyon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Commission members, Secretary Kelly and Assembly Member Frazier. I'm Richard Lyon on behalf of the California Building Industry Association. Our members provide the bulk, the lion's share, if you will, of housing in California. I'm here also on behalf of, I think you are in receipt of a letter today, dated today, by the California Business Roundtable, the California Chamber of Commerce, CBIA, and the California Business Properties Association. So I am with their proxy as well. This is the first opportunity that we've had to comment on the Caltrans document. Had we had an opportunity at an earlier time, maybe our comments would be a bit different, and maybe the document would have come out a bit differently. But what we're going to tell you today is what we would have told Caltrans at the time. We have some serious concerns about this, and the guidance that is in the document goes to regional divisions on what to emphasize and what to advocate for when they are reviewing local development plans, local development projects, and programs. And because this is CEQA, and because it's Caltrans as an expert agency doing the advocating, this thing got our immediate attention. So with that as a predicate, we believe that the Intergovernmental Review Program, as it has evolved from the 2002 document to what we have today, has gone from being a handbook and a commentary to a regulatory document. And the reason we say that, and it is found in the document itself at page 5, under the heading of Purpose of this Interim Guidance, and it's in the middle paragraph. You can look at it at your pleasure, but I'll point out a couple things to you. It says that this interim guidance is intended to be the overarching policy of the program. It then goes on to say that this is going to be applied uniformly to individual plans, programs, and projects. So what this suggests to us is that the top 6 key elements that are identified in the plan are in fact policies, and that they're in fact intended to be applied statewide in a uniform basis. So they're not just suggestions, they're not just comments by its own recognition. These are policies, and policies in fact are regulations. This, of course, didn't adhere to the normal channels to go through the Administrative Procedures Act or to be reviewed by the Office of Administrative Law. And unfortunately, we weren't able to offer comments as it was being developed. So the regulated community, despite the fact that there were some stakeholders involved, the regulated community had little to no opportunity to comment on this at all. I see my time is running short. There's a lot to be said on this. I would be happy to entertain comments about this. One thing I would point out is that the recent manifestation of this was included in a letter to the city of Rialto, where there were comments made to that city that appeared to us to go far beyond the normal commenting process that Caltrans would normally make, and seemed to be in a position of second-guessing the local decision-making process and the local determinations that we believe those local governments have the best understanding of. So I'm out of time. There's a lot to be said. Thank you for the opportunity, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
We may end up in this particular item bringing people back up. Andrew? No Andrew? Wes? May? No Wes May? Open up question to the commission. Jim?
My friend Comey, what was the outreach? You know, I mean, what was it to cities, counties? Was it to industry? What was your outreach?
On the interim guidelines specifically, there was no outreach because it was really intended to just provide a stopgap set of instructions for how people will review documents. On the larger TISG, the larger technical advisor transportation analysis guide that we're working on, that's a bigger project, and there's larger outreach that's involved, and there will be public meetings associated with that with the consultants that are working on it. But it's also being guided by folks that are outside the department, stakeholders that are on the steering committee and the technical committee.
Why wouldn't we have more outreach on the interim guidance?
Well, the interim guidelines really, we was just really our real quick attempt to try and provide some direction, because the law is already the law of the land since 2014, and staff was looking for some direction on how to do this. How do we comment on this? And we really stayed very tight on the directive. Now, if I can just maybe quickly address the letter that was referenced. I think the letter was well-intentioned by staff. It was maybe an overexpression of some of the directives that are in here. And it was very prescriptive, more than we would probably encourage staff to do. But it was, so these are the things, these are the learning opportunities that we've had, and we've had several over the last 2 years, which is why we were prompted to do the interim guidelines, because there were a lot of letters that were going out trying to individually interpret what the law required.
I don't know, my comfort level is such that, you know, when you publish something like this, there should be more input from people who it's really going to affect, you know, so whether it's city or counties, or whether it's a development community or industry leaders or whatever, freight movers, whatever we have going, you know, I just feel more comfortable. There should have been a little bit more outreach on this before we take it to the next step. There's no timetable on this, is there?
Well, the timetable, this will go away once we get the final guidelines, the final tag TISG that's being worked on with the larger input that I described. Once that's done, this will go away. But it was really our sense of trying to make sure that we have some uniformity across the state. I mean, again, yeah, maybe we should have done some more outreach. The time that we would have done would have confused the larger effort that was actually more of the genuine effort that we wanted to put out. And so that's really why this was just quick instructions to staff.
Well, I'd rather get it right than you know, rush this thing.
And again, just to speak to, I think, the mention of policy, there's really nothing in here that's different than statewide policy. We've stayed very close to that. And so we did not, if you look at the 6 items that were stepped up, one of them actually says be collaborative. That's the guidance that we provided to staff. And so the intent there was to just give staff some really clear how-to on how to address some of these issues that are coming up, and give them clarity on how to deal with it, so there wouldn't have to be that much discretion at that level.
I'll let my fellow commissioners.
Okay. Comey, there's lots of confusion in the development community right now. Those of us that speak on my day job hat here, in terms of exactly which rules. You know, we watched 743, we'd been engaged with OPR in that rulemaking process. So it's a challenge when we kind of try to understand now, particularly addressed to the freight topics. OPR has said in meetings at SCAG that this doesn't apply when freight's involved, but yet I see the letters and I think there is confusion on whether that applies, and you and I spend a whole bunch of time on the sustainable freight, and one of those goals is really to increase our competitiveness. So I think you guys maybe got a little out early as we try to work through what does that all look like and what does it mean for all of us. I'm sensing that what we had hoped to have happen is to not create confusion and have different comments come from different parts of the state, because projects are happening and our districts are going to be commenting on all of these projects and trying to streamline what they should be looking for. And in fact, basically limit the commenting on some types of projects so we wouldn't have to spend too much time on them. But with respect to freight or housing development, the intent really is to focus on what the state policies are with regards to reduction in VMT. We have stated objectives in the CTP 2040 that really guides some of this. We have some stated objectives in our strategic management plan that also speaks to increasing travel choices. Those are the kinds of things that we're trying to express in the directions that we give staff. And we are doing some training over again across the state on what staff should look at. We're looking at the letters that staff are writing and trying to make sure that we have some consistency while we wait for the larger OPR guidelines to come out. And so knowing that we can't have a vacuum, we still have to meet our CEQA obligations as a commenting agency. We're just trying to make sure we do the right thing.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to do you want me to defer to commissioners? I'm happy to wait till the end. Okay. Comey, I just want to get clarity on the process here, because I do think procedurally things are a little bit confusing, but so I want to just take a minute to walk through that. this whole effort starts really out of a law, SB 743, that was passed, right? And that law said, Caltrans, generally you should stop using the LOS matrix to analyze the impact of development and move to something else.
Yes.
And that law says you should use something else like VMT reduction or per capita VMT reduction to analyze the impact of development projects. Generally, that's what the bill said.
That's right.
And then the bill gave it to OPR to develop guidelines, CEQA-related guidelines, which OPR develops and submits to the Natural Resources Agency. That's been about a 2-year process now, right? And OPR has had several meetings with builders, with regional transportation entities, with others to work on the development of that process.
Yes.
And then Caltrans, while that is going on, in light of the law that passed, put together guidance to its staff on how to comment on development that is subject to 743.
That's right.
That's right. Okay. So the timing issue here that I think is a little bit confusing for folks is that your guidance went to the staff now, but the OPR guidelines are not finalized.
That's right.
Okay.
And I think I think also probably because we call them guidelines,
Right.
People are assuming they take the same stature as the OPR guidelines. In essence, this is a handbook to our staff on when you see these projects come in, here are things to look for, here's how you comment.
Right.
And I would dare say that when the OPR guidelines are done, this will be consistent with the OPR guidelines if we don't have the TAC TISG done in time for that.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I totally I understand, and thank you, Secretary Kelly, for those clarifying questions. And I think this is a thing that's in transition, just as transportation as we know it today is in transition in many respects, from just as we look at technology. And I get frustrated with 743 only because everybody, the focus is on VMT, and at the end of the day, I thought the real issue was GHG and making sure we reduce that. VMT is going to keep going up as GHG keeps going down. I'll say that till I'm blue in the face. And what I don't get is, this is the litigation bonanza the way it's written. I have to agree with the letter. I worry about affordable housing, and I don't see how this helps it. If we're going to ever think that road charge is going to replace the gas tax, all you have to do is give you a great way of killing it is by, attaching vehicle miles traveled and putting that around something to where somebody feels like the miles after you hit 500 miles, sorry fella, you're now going to pay instead of a penny and a half a mile, you're going to pay 25 cents a mile. The revolt will be incredible. So I think we've got to I understand this is an interim thing, but I think we also got to take a deep breath and recognize the fact that technology is changing. We're going to eventually, as batteries are cheaper, we're going to be electrifying a lot more vehicles. I think you're going to see that starting to happen. And if the real goal is to reduce air pollution, as we've done a great job doing, and if the real goal is to provide affordable housing and density along transportation corridors, then that's what we should be focusing on. Instead, this just stymies all of that and really causes prices of housing to go up. It's effectively using VMT as a growth control measure, and I think that that's a big mistake.
Lucy first.
Comey, I'm really attuned to the comment that you made about new state objectives, and Caltrans is required to do it, as we all are. We're all being good soldiers on new rules and regulations and trying to meet our climate change goals. I'm also attuned to the fact that OPR hasn't come out with their revisions yet to their documents, and yet you kind of jumped the gun on this one. I think putting this one out earlier, instead of just waiting for OPR to do it and then doing it, but also taking the opportunity before you issued this to reach out to folks and kind of put them on notice that you're going to be commenting on their development plans. It's a good way of educating them on the things that are about to change in their lives, at least putting them on notice with that outreach. And I think that's the thing that, it's certainly in my day job, the folks and our district, Caltrans has been terrific about meeting with us and explaining it to our folks, but they're all going, wait a minute, this is the letters that are likely to come out of Caltrans. We're not prepared yet for that kind of analysis in the private sector. So I just would, if I had to make a change, it would be to just hold this, do the time now to do the outreach that you need to do, let OPR come out and align everything. This is just not, it's all disconnected to us. And so that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Dunn. I would personally admit that maybe reaching out a little bit and talking about it would have helped. I think we were really caught between, we were beginning to see letters come out of the department in different districts that sounded different from one district to the other.
Right.
And so there was a compelling...
We did too, in the private sector.
So there was a compelling need to circle the wagons and basically try and get us to start looking at it from one set of lenses. That's really what was the intent of this. And it wasn't really... And we were also trying to stay away from the public process that's already going on in updating our tag TISG that we knew was going to be all-inclusive.
Yeah.
And so I would have to admit that, yeah, maybe that was an oversight, that we probably could have messaged this in a way that would have reached out on a short term and saying this is an interim
It's
handbook.
about education, right, at all of our stakeholder levels. But OPR is imminent. I mean, it's imminent. And then you might have to revise this again, right?
Yeah,
So-
and we waited. Actually, we thought OPR was imminent, and
Yeah.
it's been 2 years, which is why we felt like the damage to this dissonance that you were seeing on the letters that were coming out was necessarily, we felt compelled to correct that. And so if I guess if we waited, and after 2 years, we just felt like we needed to do something. But I hear you. I think maybe we could have messaged the intent of this so it wouldn't have been such a surprise to folks.
Thank you.
Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me add another twist to this, Comey, for drill. I think everyone knows I'm a home builder. You know, we've been trying to build homes in the state of California for a long time, and affordability is a big problem. I'm also very much in favor of reducing vehicle miles traveled. But the real issue is we have land use problems. We have communities that refuse to do what they should be doing. And in the Bay Area, I can cite areas where we have a Caltrain that starts in Gilroy, California, and goes into the heart of Silicon Valley, where all these jobs are being created, and it continues on to San Francisco, where more jobs are being created. But the land use policies of the city of San Jose, the city of Morgan Hill, the city of Gilroy are such that we're prevented from building in these locations where we could provide affordable family housing for the jobs being created in Silicon Valley. We have another instance in the East Bay where we have a BART that's extended out to Pleasanton and Livermore, and the city of Livermore will not open up land to the north of Interstate 580 where there's nothing there but cows. And as a result, we're forcing people to drive over the Altamont to Tracy, Mountain House, Modesto, Manteca, et cetera. And those are additional miles, vehicle miles traveled. These are poor, very poor land use decisions. In Marin County, we are going to open up in the first quarter of 2017 the SMART train, which is being tested now, that will go from Santa Rosa all the way down to the Larkspur Ferry. There's acres and acres of land that go up that corridor where we have a transit system, new transit system put in place, but the land use decisions in Marin County and parts of Sonoma are such that we cannot provide the housing, and that will also reduce vehicle miles traveled. So unless we do something to either take land use decisions away from those communities, which is an extreme position to take, or do something to force them to do the right thing, we're not going to solve this problem. And I just want to add that as a twist to this whole discussion.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think part of what we were trying to do, for a long time, we've always stayed away from commenting on land use. But what you talked about, I think, is essentially part of what we're trying to do is to talk about, especially when we see plans from communities, talk about making sure that there is some locational efficiency, so you reduce the amount of trips people have to take, provide choices in terms of options that are available for transportation, and you have to have density to be able to make those choices.
Yeah.
Carl.
I'll be brief because I'm mindful of the time and the chair's admonishment to all of us. But Commissioner Gilmetti is absolutely correct. We've been fortunate in the Bay Area. We've created about 550,000 jobs in the last 6 years, and we should. At the same time, our local governments have approved 55,000 new homes. That math doesn't work. And we're not building the jobs in the homes close enough together, too. So we have to stop treating our development community as if they were second-class citizens when they're providing the homes in which we live, and be serious about both job creation and home creation as well. So I concur with the comments that you're receiving as feedback from my colleagues on the commission.
So I think the only amount of wrong communication is not enough. And when you start thinking about who it directly impacts, and I understand the rush to get out and get some kind of continuity, but when we had, I think at our last meeting, we had OPR here, and they were talking about high density, affordable housing on infill projects, and they hadn't even bothered to talk to the development community on that. And they were doing their landscape and vision plan. So I think there's an apprehension when the development community sees a state agency putting together any kind of guideline without input. I think they need to be responsive because of past occurrences. So I think we need to be more cognizant of the fact that they're going and trying to be proactive and saying, whoa, stop right now. You're putting the cart before the horse. And again, we've got to remember that anything that was put into law can be unwound by another administration, by legislation. So we have to be conscious of that also going forward, that it's not cast in stone. So if they're not getting the guidelines out in a timely manner, then you need to be talking to the legislature or the administration that you need more guidance to get this stuff out there, rather than put your interpretation out there for the community that it affects. And again, as mentioned before, we are not giving the development community enough credit for what they're trying to accomplish, and tagging all these goals together through land use and reduction. And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think it's VMT, as Commissioner Madaffer said. It's got to be GHG reduction and how we get there. So thank you.
I'm going to jump in here. I'm sorry, but these four folks on this letterhead, those are pretty substantial organizations for them to be surprised. So I guess my request would be for you guys to give us a list of the people that you contacted when you said you did the outreach. Because this is...
He said he didn't do outreach.
Didn't do any outreach.
Not on this, because we have a larger process that's outreaching to the whole public.
But, so I'm concerned about, this is an action item. So what my concern is if we act on this, what exactly does it mean? Are we adopting this?
No, it is, Commissioners, it is an action item if you wanted to ask staff to capture up any comments that were made here and share them with Caltrans.
Oh, absolutely.
That would be the only action. This is just a change in policy direction as a response to 743 that the Commission should be aware of. And if you want to share the comments that were received today with Caltrans, I know that Director Doherty was here and the Secretary was here, but we can capture this up in a letter if you want to direct staff to do that.
Okay, and I think we do want to do that, but what I'm concerned about is that, we take the action today, and this train keeps rolling down the track, and then in the end they say, well, but we had a public hearing at the CTC meeting. I want to make sure that everybody in this room knows that This is not a public hearing
It's not
at
a
the
public
CTC
hearing.
meeting on this issue.
It's never a public hearing if I'm the only one talking, sir.
Okay. Well, but like I said, these are some pretty big folks to be caught off guard. I mean, they are pretty active every place that I know. And for them to be surprised is a big surprise to me.
Well, again, I think my oversight, what I can commit to is we'll reach out to the folks that you have listed and have some more consultation. And by all means, if there are any other comments that folks have, for them to reach out to us and we'll take them.
Thank you.
Oh, Hassan, okay. Okay, we have a speaker that I completely lost. So Andrew, would you like to come up? Hassan?
Oh, the big guy.
Oh, there's Andy.
No, I want him to
Oh.
stay here. I want protection here. Thank you. I'm going to make this very short. First of all, Commissioner Madaffer said something. SB 375, if it's about greenhouse gas emission, we shouldn't really be having this discussion. But it is about vehicle miles travel.
That's a long way out.
Whether you want to say it publicly or not, it is what it is. Secretary Kelly is absolutely correct. 743 did say, but it did say it originally for transit areas. And I totally support 743 for transit areas. If you're in San Francisco or Los Angeles, and both mayors did sign a letter in support, I support that 100%. The bill 743 said OPR, Office Planning Research, may develop guidelines for outside the transit areas. That's where we have an issue. And I want to compliment Malcolm, Comey, Secretary Kelly, OPR. We have been working for the last year and a half with them. They delayed the rulemaking from October, so I thank them for that. My biggest concern is not Caltrans rushing into this, is OVR even rushing into this and putting something for outside the transit area, which most, if you take the Skag region and you go out of downtown Los Angeles, even in LA, you're not in a transit area. You can't do the land uses that you want to do unless, like the commissioner said, give me land use authority are with local elected officials, not with the state or the regional government. So our urge to OPR, and we just had a workshop at Skag, and OPR were there, and we were very gracious in answering questions. We have a lot of questions from stakeholders. And we are putting, together with the Sacramento Council of Government, over $500,000 to do some case studies of what would this do to a project in LA, a project in Riverside, project in San Bernardino, to project in the Central Valley. And we're urging OPR, if you're in a hurry to do the rules, do it in such a flexible way when we have the analytics to come back and modify it, because frankly, I'm telling you right now, knowing this region the way I do, and I know it very well, these rules will pretty much say it becomes very difficult to add capacity of any kind, housing, transportation, whatever it is. We just held a housing summit in downtown Los Angeles. Over 500 people came. And they said, well, Lucy spoke at that, or moderated the panel. Well, we know we need housing supply. Well, we want to make it easier to supply housing, not more difficult. And when I talk to Comey or to Malcolm, I understand what they're going through. I understand they want to be ahead of the curve. But sometimes analytics helps. I urge all of you, Mr. Secretary, and again, we're working with OPR, we're putting our own planning money to make sure we have analytics behind what we're going to do. But honestly, to have a statewide, outside the transit area test for both land use and transportation is way premature without having the evidence. If you tell me for downtown San Francisco and downtown LA, I say, okay, that would work, great. So I am taking OPR's promise that they're going to come back for another discussion before they finalize the rule, that we finish the analytics with our other partner MPOs, and to Commissioner Madafers, we have to be upfront what this is. If it's about VMT, let us face it and let us deal with it. If it's about greenhouse gas emission, I'll tell you right now, hypothetically, if we all drive electric cars tomorrow, would we need still to worry about that? And the rules said yes. So it is not about greenhouse gas emission, even though that's what the law is. So I urge you, not only as a department, and I have a great respect for these people, they're doing it for the right reasons. I urge you to take a breather, be flexible, let the analytics answer some of the questions that were raised at the workshop. And we also ask OPR, Mr. Secretary, to come back for another workshop. They promised to come back because they had a lot of questions there. And once these analytics in a few months will be done, we would know more. What would this do to our project in San Diego, in Riverside, in Fresno, etc.? And then we would be able to have a very honest discussion. Back to this applies to both transportation and land use. And who's in charge of land use? One of the biggest problems with building houses is the NIMBYs, not in my backyard. I have 190 cities who are members of SCAG. And 189 of them tell me, get out, don't talk to me about housing, I'm built out. And when you ask them, where are these people going to live there? Well, they live somewhere else. It doesn't work that way. And so if we're going to make rules, we're going to make sure that these rules have some sense to them who makes the decisions. So I urge you to flexibility. I urge for just give us some time to study this a little bit more. And there's nobody more than me wanted to accomplish what OPR want to accomplish in this region. We have done a regional transportation plan, sustainable community strategy that I'll put against anyone in the state because we want to be sustainable, but we want to do it in a responsible way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Andrew Henderson, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm sorry I was out of the room if I was called earlier, but I wanted to just follow up on this. A couple of misapprehensions have been stated about SB 743 just now. One is that as soon as OPR puts out guidelines in a month or so, they're effective. That's not the law. The law said that OPR is to develop recommendations that go to the Secretary of Resources, who then must go through formal public hearings and then adopt something which may or may not go outside of the transportation priority areas. And I think it's a mistake if they would. But all those public hearings have to be held yet and won't be held until long after OPR puts something on the street. So it's not enough to say just wait until OPR puts something out in a month and then conform to it. Because what OPR puts out in a month won't be law. It won't be law until it goes through those public processes at the Secretary of Resources through there, and they're projecting an effective date of January 1, 2019. So these Caltrans guidelines are more than 2 years early compared to anything that's ever going to be effective law pursuant to SB 743. That needs to be taken into account and should be a good reason to retract these until then. Because I hope that the policy direction, you called it a change in policy direction, will change a lot more between now and January 1 of 2019. A couple of other points. VMT is not an environmental impact under CEQA. It's not an environmental impact. It's miles traveled. That's a utility. That's a measure of something good. You can say, as a matter of policy, we don't think it's good anymore, but that doesn't make it an environmental impact. Anything more than counting the number of housing units built is an environmental impact that has to be negated or reduced. That's not building the houses isn't the environmental impact, it's the good. But it does have environmental impacts when you build houses, and those impacts need to be negated. But you're really conflating a social utility with a negative environmental impact, and that's wrong. I agree with Commissioner Madifer. The problem, we shouldn't be looking at VMT, we should be looking at GHG. SB 375, 9.5 years ago, the first draft, called for VMT reduction, per capita VMT reduction. It was taken out of the first draft, and it went through on the basis of emissions. So we need to get back to an emissions metric and not a VMT metric. And the last thing I'll say is, this has tremendous implications for local land use control. I mean, some of you, there's been discussion about NIMBY, Commissioner Gilmetti, about cities aren't allowing dense infill around transit. To some extent, SB 743 was meant to specifically address that with removing LOS, level of service, from transportation priority areas, and thereby giving some small green light under CEQA to those kind of infill projects. But really what this kind of VMT reduction is that's reflected in the Caltrans guidelines is more a full frontal attack on local control of land use, because not every community is ready. It really has the ability to radically reform itself into a centripetal environment where everything's gravitating towards the center. And we've got population growth. It's got to go somewhere, and I don't believe it's all going to go in this centripetal manner towards the center of cities and the center of counties. But that's what this policy is aimed to incentivize or to mandate. So I think at a very high level, there needs to be a philosophical policy discussion about, is it VMT or GHG? And if it's VMT, what does that mean? What does that really mean for land use in California, for local control of land use, which is constitutionally guaranteed? And is this really the way you should attack greenhouse gas, through this or through fleet change and fuel change and over time? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, we do have an action item, and it's to, so that everybody's clear, it's to forward these comments to
Staff can prepare a letter to Caltrans, outlining some of the concerns that have been expressed today.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, again, I think this was very instructive. There's obviously going to be other public forums. Obviously the direction of the chair, but at some point as this manifests its way through the system over the next several years, I think it would be important that this commission be kept informed, and if necessary, at some point schedule a real public hearing on this. So, because there's not a lot of opportunities for the public to weigh in at different levels of government. This would be that's what I think CTC is so good for, among many things, is the ability for the public to come here and share with us their concerns.
So we'll need a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Art, second by Taglioni. Any further questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to run through this thing. We are not leaving here until we're done. So if you want to stay here instead of going to have a cocktail, then keep talking. Now, for staff, I want you to combine as many of these as you can. And if there's nothing controversial, we'll take much more as a group than we usually do. Okay? Information calendar.
Commissioners, next 11 items, 26 through 36, are information calendar items, and information will not be presented unless specifically requested by a commissioner. Note that item 27 has corrections to the dates on page 2.
Any questions? Very good. Consent calendar.
Consent calendar. Commissioners, the next 12 items, 37 through 48, are consent calendar items. Please note that on item 37, there's a correction to the project number and county, and under item 42, resolution C21507 is withdrawn.
Move the consent calendar.
Motion by Madaffer, second by Inman. Any questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 49. Garth.
Tab 49 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the I-80 SR State Route 65 Interchange Improvement Project located in Placer County. The project will construct improvements to I-80 and State Route 65 Interchange in the cities of Roseville and Rockland. The FEIR determined that the impacts to the aesthetics would be significant and unavoidable. However, Placer County Transportation Planning Agency adopted a statement of overriding considerations that finding that the benefits outweigh the impacts. Staff recommends that Commission accept the final EIR statement of overriding consideration.
Second.
Motion by Tavoloni, second by Dunn. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 50.
Tab 50 is an action item. This is a final EIR for the Peninsula Corridor Electrification Project. The FEIR determined that the impacts related to construction and operations would be significant and unavoidable. However, the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board adopted the statement of overriding considerations, finding that the benefits outweigh the impacts. Staff recommends that the Commission accept the final EIR statement of overriding considerations and approve this project for future consideration of funding.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Inman. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 51, Don.
Item 51 is an amendment to the STIP advancement policy, where staff is recommending that we revise the policy to allow advancements on the transit and intercity rail projects programmed in any year of the STIP.
Second.
What does that mean? I just have to, what does that mean?
Oh, okay, sorry. I was trying to shorten. So the original, okay, yes. The original policy was approved in August, and at that time we allowed programmed projects to advance that were programmed in the 16-17 fiscal year. We have PTA funding, and we have very few transit and intercity rail projects programmed for 16-17. So we want to, in order to utilize the funding, we want to.
Okay, so you've got the funding. It's
we
not
have
like,
the funding.
okay.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, the motion was by Tavalione, the second was by Inman. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 52.
Commissioners, in August, the Commission approved a policy to advance on a first-come, first-served basis projects that were programmed in a future fiscal year for the construction phase only. This is for the ATP program. However, because there have been no advanced construction allocation requests since this policy adoption, staff recommends revising the policy to also allow the advanced allocation on a first-come, first-served basis for all project phases. Staff recommends your approval.
Second.
Motion by Art, second by Dunn. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 53.
53, this is an action item to consider the project scope change request for the Patterson Road Safe Routes to School project in the town of Paradise. The scope of this project is to construct sidewalks and curbs and gutters along the south side of Patterson Road, where the sidewalks are currently missing. This project also connects 3 schools. The bids for this project came in higher than expected, causing the project costs to increase beyond what the town of Paradise was awarded in their ATP grant.
Motion by Tablioni.
She's not done.
Okay.
She's not done.
Oh, okay, she's not finished.
Okay, I was just gonna, that they worked in
Time
agreement
out.
with. You want?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. Working with BCAG, Paradise is proposing to construct the scope in 2 phases. 60% of the scope will be completed using ATP funds. The remaining 40% of the scope will be funded with committed congestion mitigation and air quality funds. The solution will retain the benefits of the project as proposed in the original project application. Staff recommends approving this project scope change request.
So moved.
Who made the motion? Jim Gilmetti made the motion. Second by Joe. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 54 has been withdrawn.
Yes.
Item 55.
55, this is an action item to amend the 2015 Active Transportation Program for the Metropolitan Planning Organization competitive component for the Southern California Association of Governments. The Commission adopted the 2015 SCAG ATP program at the January Commission meeting. At that time, SCAG left $225,000 of programming capacity available and then until they could work with their counties to determine where to program the funds. At this time, SCAG is requesting that this $225,000 be programmed to the Orange County Loop Coyote Creek project in Orange County. Staff has reviewed the request and determined that it is consistent with ATP guidelines. Therefore, staff recommends your approval.
Motion by Inman, second by Tablioni. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. 56.
Commissioners, item 56 is an action item requesting amendment of 21 new shop projects in the 2016 shop. These are primarily projects funded through a reservation in the Commission-adopted program. In addition, the item also requests a revision of currently programmed projects in the 2016 shop. After conferring with the department, one project requesting change was removed. That change is reflected in the replacement book item. Staff recommends your approval.
Second.
Motion by Arp, second by Dunn. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. 57.
Item 57 is an information item. This is a STIP amendment for notice for a STIP project in Sacramento County. This is a reimbursement. They're requesting reimbursement in 1920. Staff, again, this is a notice. We would like to note that the book item does not include all of the necessary information that we need, although we do have the information. So when the notice comes back in January for action, the book item will be revised to include all necessary information.
Thank you. Item 58.
Item 58, sorry, got to change papers, notes. Item 58 is a TCRP amendment request. This is an action item to amend the project, so in Alameda County, and it's to amend the funding plan, and staff recommends approval.
Second.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Gilmetti. Questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 59.
Item 59 is a TCIF baseline amendment for the San Gabriel Valley Grade Separation Program. Staff has reviewed the request and we recommend approval.
Motion by Arp, second by Inman. Questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. 60.
Item 60 is an action item. This item is to approve the PUC's annual request for the Railroad Grade Crossing Program in the amount of $3.78 million. Staff recommends approval.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Madaffer. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 60.
We just did
61.
Commissioners, item 61 is an action item requesting the allocation of $190 million for 10 SHOP projects. All projects are in the commission-adopted 2016 SHOP. Staff has reviewed the project for readiness and recommends your approval.
Second. Motion by Madaffer, second by Taglioni. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Next item.
I'm going to take items 62 and 63 together. These are both STIP allocation requests that have been reviewed and we find consistent with the programs. Staff recommends approval.
Second.
Motion by Taglioni, second by Dunn. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 64 has been withdrawn. Item 65-2 has been withdrawn. Item 65-1.
Commissioners, the first project in item 65, number 1, is the 2016 SHOP project in the commission-adopted 2016 program. This request is for an additional $1.887 million in capital outlay support funding for completion of the environmental phase. The requested change is larger than the adjustment authority delegated to the department in the commission's updated G12 resolution and therefore requires commission approval. Staff recommends approval of the additional support funding and further recommends that the project be included in the quarterly project delivery report watch list to monitor the progress of the environmental phase.
Question?
Motion by
Question.
Go ahead.
Who's here from District 4? Bijan? What are we spending another $1,887,000 for on basically an old bridge that we're just trying to fix up and replace? Is that for EIR? Is that for environmental work?
It is for environmental work. Good afternoon, Commissioner, Mr. Chair. This bridge is an 86-year-old bridge. It is in Marin County on Highway 1. It is the only access to the town of Point Reyes Station. Staff has done a lot of outreach to the community and has heard some of the needs of the community and the interests of the community with respect to this bridge. The community is very interested in the historic value, in the looks of the bridge and how it operates within the small town. But this bridge carries quite a bit of traffic, especially on weekends when there are events happening in the city. The department has developed a number of alternatives. The city's interest was basically, and the community interest was basically to retrofit this bridge, but this is one that cannot be retrofitted. We actually did have to do substantial amount of work to prove the fact that the bridge could not be retrofitted because really the locals wanted to keep it just as a retrofit, keep it exactly as what it is that they're seeing. So we have developed a number of alternatives. We've realized that there are about 10 environmental resource agencies and permitting agencies that we have to go through. So the project environmental document has grown from a negative declaration to an EIR, and we need additional funds to develop and to carry the project through that process.
You know, I've done a lot of environmental impact reports in my life, and if I read this right, it was programmed for $2.3 million. Is that more than environmental? What's in that?
That's the project, that's a PNED, project approval and environmental document. That's what that carries.
Just the environmental document?
Yes.
And then you're adding another $1,887,000. Now, this is a little small bridge about this long, and you're going to spend almost $4.2 million for environmental impact report.
It is located in a very sensitive area, as I mentioned. The Coastal Commission is involved. 10 environmental resource agencies are involved. There are habitats around this bridge. The property owners on the fourth side of the bridge are very close to the footprint of the bridge. We've also trying to address some connectivity of the local bicycle and pedestrian.
I understand all that, and I understand, the cost of rebuilding a bridge, et cetera, and I know it needs to be done. But I got to tell you, from my own personal experience of doing environmental impact reports, this number is outrageous. And so whatever you're being asked to do, sometimes you just have to say, no, we're not doing that. And take your chances if someone wants to challenge that in court. But $4.2 million, that's just paper. We can't put pavement, we can't put bricks, we can't put steel together. That's $4.2 million we've lost out of the state highway account. I'm not just picking on you. This happens throughout the state. We're going way overboard in what I think we need to do to comply with the law, and that's less dollars that we have for capital improvements. Anyway, thank you.
What's the total estimated cost of the project?
The construction cost is about $12 million.
About how much?
About $12 million.
So a third of it, a third more is just for environmental
Yes.
study.
That's ridiculous. Is it going to be replaced with a concrete structure?
The alternatives that we have is concrete and also steel. One of the interests from the community is to keep the truss steel structure that is existing, to make it similar to that from a look perspective. It doesn't really change the cost as much, but we do have about 6 alternatives that we're going to be running through. One of them we already know we can't do, which is the retrofit of the bridge, so that alternative is pretty much at the end of its life. The other ones, we would have to go through the community involvement and develop them prior to getting with the resource agencies and seeing what are some of the interests from the permitting agencies that they would require before we can actually finalize. There is also an issue with the real estate available in that area. As I mentioned, there is a vet hospital on one corner, there is 2 residences at the other 2 sites, and then there's a trail at the fourth corner of the bridge. And so it's going to be very involved with respect to getting everybody's approval and getting all of the right-of-way and getting all of the utilities that are on the bridge relocated in order to construct the bridge.
Mr. Chair, I raised some of these questions last month because this project was up last month, wasn't it, as an information item?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes or no? We talked about a bridge near Point Reyes last month, or maybe it was August. I don't know.
We talked about it with the delivery committee.
Oh, it was on the delivery committee. Okay. Bottom line is, one of the questions I had is, who is raising all of these requirements? Is it really a public outreach, or are there a lot of special interests that basically are jacking up the price of this thing and wanting to have special treatment for this project?
I have personally been to the town. I have walked under the bridge. I've walked over the bridge. I've gone to the school. I've talked to all of the neighbors. I've talked to the Chamber of Commerce, all of the business owners alongside Highway 1. I've heard all of their comments. The original plan that we had was too narrow of look at this bridge. It would have actually seriously damaged the business and the community because it would have been a one-way traffic control. One of the things coming out of that discussion is to have an ABC type of an approach, an accelerated bridge construction approach, where we would actually build this bridge in one location and then roll it in over a week or 10 days. So that's a different approach that we're taking. It will also reduce the amount of impact that we have with the resource agencies, and hopefully that would help us out in obtaining the permits that are required
Those are
in the
design,
construction of the bridge.
Bijan, those are design considerations. I understand that, but those shouldn't be part of an environmental impact report. Those are scoping session questions and ideas that come out when you meet with the community, et cetera, before you finalize your design.
Well, but when we do the environmental document, part of that is a scoping meeting with the community to actually see what are some of the interests. It is not for us to complete a design, then to take it to the community and get rejected, and basically to redo everything that we have to do. So I'll be standing here in front of you asking for a different money for a different phase of the project where we're doing this upfront.
I would just, for me personally, I can't be supportive of this until I get more information about why you need this, and I think we need more information, and I just don't see why we need to move on something like this at this time with the lack of information that we have on this project.
I do have a PowerPoint presentation if the commission wants me to go through that, if that's.
I think we may have to bring it back next month. We're gonna do that.
Just a quick comment, Mr. Chair, if it's okay. I think the speakers told us it's a complicated project, private property, environmental reasons, trails, and habitat. It may be that we need more information. I would never oppose that, but, I'm sympathetic to you've done a lot of work locally. You've heard from a lot of people in the town. I'm inclined to think you're probably designing admittedly an expensive EIR work, but, I think that what you're thinking about the bridge is probably the right way to handle it.
At some point though, it's like, do you want a bridge into town? You want it to fall down. Here's what we got, and we're going to try and make it work. But, for a third of this project to be environmental, that's criminal. It really is criminal. Oh, I do. I'm sorry. Okay, we're going to have you bring this back because we're going to need a presentation. So we're going to bring it back next month so we can get all the questions answered.
And commissioners, I would add, what staff will do is arrange a time for the delivery committee commissioners to have a more thorough discussion on this project.
Will do.
All right. Next item, 66.
Commissioners, item 66 is an action item requesting a lump sum allocation for Prop 1B local seismic retrofit bond funding for 8 projects in fiscal year 2016-17. Staff has reviewed the listing and recommends your approval.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Madaffer. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. 67.
I'll take items 67 and 68 together. Both of these items are TCRP allocation requests that have been reviewed and found consistent with the program guidelines. Therefore, staff recommends approval.
Motion by Madaffer, second by Art. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. 69.
We can take items 69 and 70 together. These are both requests for ATP project allocations. Staff has reviewed these requests and recommends your approval.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Madaffer. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 71, Don.
Yes, item 71 is an action item. This is a letter of no prejudice request for a transit intercity rail capital project. Staff will be recommending approval of this item, but we want to note that this program is unique in that the transportation agency selects the projects, but the commission allocates the funds. Now that the program is in its second round, staff is having a challenge understanding the projects and comparing those requested allocations to the approved program. So with that, we have asked, we've identified a couple of items to help better understand the program and have discussed those items with agency and Caltrans. With that said, staff is going to recommend approval.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Art. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Next item.
Commissioners, this is a Transit and Intercity Capital Program request to allocate $4.83 million for the Metropolitan Rapid Transit and Rail Connectivity Project in Fresno. This is a portion of the $8 million in funding this project has received. This portion of the funding will be used to purchase ticket vending machines that will be used on the bus rapid transit route due to open in November of 2017. Staff recommends approval of this allocation.
Modaffert makes the motion, Taglione second. Any questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 73 has been withdrawn. Item 74. How many of these can we take in a group? Is there anything controversial on this?
Yeah, I think we can take, the one that we have to take separately is 79.
We can take 74 through
I
78?
think so. Yeah, they're all time extensions for contract award.
Okay, we're going to do 74 through 78 in one lump. And it's a motion by Christine, second by Art. Any further questions? All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 79.
79, this item is a request to extend the period of contract award for a transit and intercity rail capital program project, the Bus Rapid Transit expansion in San Joaquin County. The issues that delayed the award of this project were not unforeseen, as the project requested allocation prematurely. Additionally, this is a post-fact request, as the period to award the contract expired in September. However, as noted previously, this is a new program and one in which the Transportation Agency develops guidelines and approves the program of projects. Staff has spoken with Caltrans and the Transportation Agency and has been assured that measures have been put in place to make sure projects' future allocation requests are reviewed for project readiness. Therefore, staff recommends the Commission make an exception to program guidelines and approve this extension request.
Motion by Taglione, second by Arp. Any further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 80, Lori.
80 is a, 80, which one? This is a request for project completion time extension. Staff recommends your approval.
Motion by Taglione, second by Arp. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Any other matters or public comment? Then Merry Christmas, everybody, and we'll stand adjourned.